At some point in the past week, you almost certainly did something to make yourself feel special. Maybe you did not think of it that way. Maybe it was something small enough that calling it a bid for specialness would feel like an overstatement. You mentioned an accomplishment in a conversation in a way that was perhaps not strictly necessary. You shared something you had made or written or thought. You dressed a certain way, or positioned yourself a certain way in a photograph, or said something that you hoped would make the people around you see you as more interesting or more capable or more original than you might otherwise appear. Or perhaps it was something larger, a project you have been pursuing for years, not just because you enjoy it, but because you need it to set you apart. A career choice that is at least partly motivated by the need to be the kind of person who does something like that. An identity you have constructed around being different from the people around you in some way that you regard as meaningful. Or perhaps it showed up in a quieter place. A private conviction that you see things other people miss. A sense that your particular combination of experiences, tastes, and perspectives is somehow more interesting than the combinations available to most people. A feeling that the full depth of who you are has not yet been recognized by the world, but that if it were, it would be recognized as something worth recognizing. The need to feel special, to feel distinguished from the crowd, to feel that your existence matters in some way that other existences do not, is one of the most powerful and most consistently underexamined motivations in human life. It is so pervasive and so fundamental that most people barely notice it operating, in the same way that a fish does not notice water. It is the medium in which human social life takes place. And yet the science of this need, where it comes from, what it actually requires, and what happens when it goes unmet or is pursued in destructive ways, is one of the most illuminating bodies of research in all of psychology. Because this need, when examined carefully, turns out to be not what it appears to be on the surface. It is not vanity. It is not ego. It is not a character flaw or a symptom of shallow self-regard. It is something considerably older, considerably more fundamental, and considerably more interesting than any of those descriptions suggest. Let's begin with the most fundamental question. Why do human beings need to feel special at all? The social psychologist Roy Baumeister at the University of Queensland, who has spent decades studying the self and self-esteem, has proposed one of the most comprehensive frameworks for understanding the human need to feel special. Baumeister's sociometer theory, developed with Mark Leary in a landmark 1995 paper, proposes that self-esteem is not primarily about how people feel about themselves in isolation. It is a monitor of social inclusion and exclusion, a psychological system that tracks how accepted and valued the individual is within their social group, and that produces the feeling of high self-esteem when social inclusion is high, and the feeling of low self-esteem when social inclusion is threatened. On this account, the need to feel special is not a need for a particular subjective feeling of superiority. It is a need to feel that other people regard you as a valued member of the group, as someone whose presence is desired and whose contributions are recognized. The feeling of being special is the internal signal that this social condition has been met, and the feeling of being ordinary, invisible, or overlooked is the signal that it has not been met, and that action is required. This framework has profound implications for understanding why the need to feel special is so powerful and so persistent. In the ancestral environment in which human psychology evolved, social exclusion was not simply unpleasant, it was potentially fatal. An individual excluded from the group lost access to the cooperative benefits that made survival possible: shared food, collective defense against predators, assistance in child rearing, access to mates, and the accumulated knowledge and skills of the group. The individual who was perceived as adding little of value to the group, as making no distinctive contribution to the collective enterprise, was an individual whose continued membership in the group was under threat. The sociometer, Baumeister and Leary argue, evolved as a system for monitoring this threat continuously and motivating behavior that would reduce it before exclusion actually occurred. The discomfort of feeling ordinary, invisible, or undervalued is the sociometer's alarm signal, the indication that the individual's social standing is declining and that something needs to be done to restore it. The pleasure of feeling recognized, appreciated, or admired is the sociometer's confirmation signal, the indication that social standing is secure and that the individual's place in the group is not under threat. This is why the need to feel special is so difficult to satisfy permanently. The sociometer is not designed to reach a stable resting state of satisfaction. It is designed to remain vigilant, to be sensitive to changes in the social environment, to register threats to social standing quickly, and to motivate a response. A sociometer that reached complete and permanent satisfaction would be a sociometer that had stopped doing its job. The system's design ensures that the feeling of being special is always temporary, always requiring renewal, always vulnerable to being undermined by evidence that others are valued more highly or that one's own value is declining. The developmental psychologist Susan Harder at the University of Denver has documented how the need for specialness develops across the lifespan and how it interacts with the development of the self-concept more broadly. Harder's research found that children as young as 4 or 5 years of age begin to develop stable evaluations of themselves across different domains, assessing how good they are at physical activity, at academic tasks, at social relationships, and at other areas of competence. And that children show a systematic and early emerging bias toward believing they are above average in domains they regard as important. This above-average bias, which the Swedish psychologist Ola Svensson famously documented in adults by finding that the large majority of drivers believe themselves to be above average in driving ability, is one of the most robust findings in social psychology. The vast majority of people believe themselves to be above average in a range of positive attributes, including intelligence, leadership potential, ethical character, sense of humor, and social skill. This is, of course, statistically impossible. If most people are above average, the word average has lost its meaning. But the finding is extraordinarily consistent across populations, cultures, and domains of self-evaluation. The psychologist David Dunning at Cornell University, who with Justin Kruger documented what became known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, has proposed that the above-average bias reflects not simply motivated self-enhancement, but a genuine epistemic limitation. The less skilled a person is in a particular domain, the less equipped they are to recognize their own lack of skill, because the same knowledge and ability that would allow them to perform well is the knowledge and ability required to evaluate their own performance accurately. The incompetent person does not know what competent performance looks like and therefore cannot recognize that their own performance falls short of it. This mechanism, which Dunning calls the double burden of incompetence, operates alongside the motivated self-enhancement that Baumeister and others have documented, and together they produce a population in which the sense of being special and above average is almost universal and almost immune to straightforward disconfirmation. The psychologist Shelley Taylor at UCLA, in her landmark 1988 paper with Jonathan Brown titled Illusion and Well-Being, made an argument that was controversial when it appeared and has remained so. Positive illusions about the self, including the illusion of being somewhat above average and somewhat more in control of events than one actually is, are not simply errors in self-perception. They are adaptive distortions that serve important psychological functions. People with more positive self-illusions show greater psychological resilience, greater motivation to pursue goals, better recovery from setbacks, and better social functioning than people whose self-assessments are more accurate. Taylor and Brown's argument was a direct challenge to the assumption that mental health requires accurate self-perception. They proposed instead that mild, bounded self-deception about one's own specialness is not a symptom of poor mental health, but a condition of good mental health. The person who accurately perceives themselves as average in most respects, who has no positive illusions about their abilities or their control over outcomes, is on this account at a systematic psychological disadvantage relative to the person who maintains a modest but persistent sense of being somewhat better than average. This argument has been refined and qualified significantly in the decades since it was published. The psychologist Edward Diener at the University of Illinois has found that the relationship between positive self-illusions and well-being is complex and context-dependent. Illusions that are too extreme, that involve grandiose beliefs about one's superiority, rather than modest beliefs about being somewhat above average, are associated not with better outcomes but with worse ones. The relationship is curvilinear. Moderate positive illusions are adaptive, but extreme positive illusions are not. Diener and others have also found that cross-cultural variation in the relationship between self-illusions and well-being is substantial. In individualistic cultures, particularly in North America and Western Europe, where standing out and distinguishing oneself is a core cultural value, moderate positive self-illusions appear robustly adaptive. In collectivistic cultures, particularly in East Asia, where fitting in and maintaining harmonious group relationships is more valued, the same self-illusions may be less adaptive, or even counterproductive. In these cultural contexts, the definition of what it means to be special is fundamentally different. Being exceptional at supporting the group, at subordinating individual desires to collective needs, at maintaining relationships harmoniously, is more valued than being exceptional in ways that distinguish one from the group. This cross-cultural variation points to something important about the architecture of the need to feel special. The need itself appears to be universal, rooted in the evolutionary dynamics of social inclusion and exclusion that Baumeister and Leary documented. But the specific content of what counts as special, what attributes are valued, what contributions are recognized as distinctive and worthy, varies enormously across cultures, subcultures, and individuals. The sociometer tracks social inclusion and exclusion, but what constitutes the basis for inclusion and exclusion is culturally defined. The psychologist Mark Leary at Duke University, Baumeister's collaborator on the sociometer theory, has extended the analysis to what he calls the self-conscious emotions, the emotions that are specifically activated in the context of social evaluation. These include pride, shame, embarrassment, and guilt. Each of these emotions functions, Leary argues, as a social signal. Pride signals elevated social standing and invites recognition from others. Shame signals a significant threat to social standing and motivates withdrawal or repair. Embarrassment signals a minor breach of social norms and motivates appeasement. Guilt signals a specific violation of relational obligations and motivates reparative behavior. Pride, the positive emotion most directly associated with feeling special, is the emotion that has received most attention in the context of the need for distinctiveness. Leary's research has found that pride is felt most intensely not simply when one has achieved something, but when one has achieved something that is recognized and appreciated by others. Private achievement produces a quieter sense of satisfaction. Public achievement, achievement that is seen and acknowledged by people whose judgment one values, produces the full experience of pride that feeds the sociometer. This is why the need to feel special so often manifests not simply as the desire to be good at something, but as the desire to be seen being good at something. The philosopher and psychologist Jesse Prinz at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York has extended this analysis to argue that the desire for recognition, for being seen and acknowledged by others as having value, is not simply one human motive among many. It is what Prinz calls the master motive, the motivational foundation that organizes much of the rest of human social and cultural behavior. Prinz draws on the philosophical tradition associated with Hegel and extended by contemporary philosophers including Axel Honneth to argue that the fundamental human need is not simply for survival or pleasure or social connection in general, but for recognition specifically, for being seen by others as a person of value, as someone whose existence and contributions matter. This framework helps explain phenomena that simpler accounts of human motivation struggle with. Why do artists work for years or decades on projects that may never be seen by a significant audience? Why do people take extreme risks to achieve status in their peer group? Why do people who have achieved every conventional marker of success continue to feel driven to prove themselves further? Why do people sometimes sacrifice material well-being, stable relationships, and physical safety in the pursuit of being recognized as extraordinary? On Prinz's account, the answer is the same in every case. Recognition is not a means to these other ends. It is the end itself, the deepest and most persistent human motivation. The evolutionary logic behind this argument connects back to the sociometer theory. In the ancestral environment, being recognized as a person of value by the group was not simply emotionally satisfying. It was the condition of survival. The individual who was recognized as skilled, reliable, generous, brave, or knowledgeable was the individual who was most included in the group's cooperative activities, most likely to receive assistance in times of need, and most likely to attract desirable mates. Recognition was, quite literally, a survival resource. And the drive to obtain it, to do whatever was necessary to be seen as valuable by the people around you, was a drive with real fitness consequences. The clinical psychologist Paul Wink at Wellesley College has studied what happens when the need to feel special becomes pathological, developing into patterns that interfere with social functioning rather than supporting it. Wink's research distinguishes between two forms of what psychologists call narcissism: overt narcissism, which is characterized by an explicit and highly visible sense of superiority and entitlement, a constant need to be the center of attention, and a lack of empathy for others; and covert narcissism, which is characterized by a more hidden and often unconscious sense of specialness, combined with hypersensitivity to criticism, a pervasive sense of being misunderstood or underappreciated, and a constant undercurrent of resentment at not being recognized as the exceptional person one believes oneself to be. What is most striking about Wink's analysis is that both forms of narcissism, despite their very different surface presentations, represent responses to the same underlying vulnerability, the terror of being ordinary. The overt narcissist defends against this terror by asserting superiority loudly and continuously, by seeking out contexts in which their greatness can be displayed, and by dismissing or devaluing evidence that might threaten the sense of superiority. The covert narcissist defends against the same terror more quietly, by maintaining an internal sense of exceptional specialness, while nursing grievances about the world's failure to recognize it, and experiencing every ordinary social interaction as a potential slight. The philosopher Charles Taylor at McGill University, in his influential 1991 book The Ethics of Authenticity, offered a different but complementary analysis of why the modern need to feel special has taken on the particular intensity it has in contemporary Western culture. Taylor argues that the modern ideal of authenticity, the idea that each individual has a unique inner self that must be discovered, cultivated, and expressed, is not a universal feature of human psychology that has always been present. It is a historically specific ideal that emerged in the Romantic period and has intensified with the spread of democratic culture. In pre-modern societies, Charles Taylor argues, social roles and identities were largely assigned rather than chosen. You were born into a particular social position, a particular community, a particular set of relationships and obligations, and your identity was substantially constituted by these assigned coordinates. The question of whether one was special or distinctive in some personal sense barely arose, because personal distinctiveness was not what was at stake. What mattered was how well one fulfilled the social role one had been given. In modern democratic societies, where formal hierarchies are dramatically reduced and social roles are in principle open to all, this assigned distinctiveness disappears. No one is born special in the sense of being uniquely positioned by birth. The burden of establishing one's distinctiveness falls on the individual. Everyone must construct, perform, and maintain a unique identity, because the social structures that previously assigned distinctiveness have been removed. The result is what Charles Taylor calls the democratization of uniqueness. Everyone must be unique, but uniqueness, by definition, cannot be universal. This analysis helps explain why the modern experience of the need to feel special is so often accompanied by anxiety rather than simply motivation. In the ancestral environment, social standing was determined by demonstrated competence and contribution in a small group of people who knew each other well and over whom the individual had some genuine influence. In the modern world, social standing must be established across an enormous and largely anonymous social landscape, in the absence of clear criteria for what counts as special, and in the face of vastly more competition than any ancestral human ever encountered. The psychologist Jean Twenge at San Diego State University has documented what she argues is a measurable generational increase in narcissism and in the intensity of the need for specialness in Western populations, particularly in the United States. Twenge's data, drawing on large samples of college students over several decades using standardized measures of narcissism and self-reported specialness, show consistent increases in scores on these measures from the 1980s through the 2000s. Twenge attributes this increase to a combination of factors, including changes in parenting practices that emphasize children's uniqueness and specialness, educational philosophies built around self-esteem promotion, and the emergence of social media platforms that reward the continuous performance of a distinctive and engaging self. The relationship between social media and the need to feel special is one of the most actively studied areas in contemporary psychology. Social media platforms provide an unprecedented audience for the performance of specialness, an unprecedented system for quantifying how that performance is received in the form of likes, shares, comments, and follower counts, and an unprecedented opportunity for social comparison with an enormous range of other people's performances of specialness. The result is a feedback loop in which the need for recognition is simultaneously amplified and made more anxious, because the evidence of one's specialness or ordinariness is now quantified, public, continuously updated, and available for comparison with thousands of others at any moment. The psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan has conducted research on the psychological effects of social media use that illuminates the darker side of this feedback loop. Kross and his colleagues found that passive consumption of other people's social media presentations, scrolling through feeds showing other people's achievements, experiences, and lives, tends to produce declines in well-being and increases in envy. The mechanism appears to involve upward social comparison, the tendency to compare oneself to people who appear to be doing better, which activates the sociometer's threat signal and produces the uncomfortable recognition that others may be more valued, more successful, or more interesting than oneself. What the psychology of the need to feel special ultimately reveals is something important and somewhat humbling about the nature of human motivation. The drive to distinguish yourself, to be seen as valuable, and to be recognized as having something to offer that others do not, is not vanity or ego or weakness. It is not a character flaw that more psychologically evolved human beings would be free of. It is one of the deepest expressions of a social organism's fundamental need to secure its place in the group that makes its survival possible. The need to feel special is not separate from the need to belong. It is its shadow side, the version of the need to belong that arises when belonging feels uncertain. The fear of being ordinary is the fear of being dispensable, and the drive to overcome that fear, to prove through achievement or distinctiveness or recognition that one's presence in the group has value, is one of the most powerful engines of human creativity, ambition, and social contribution. It is also, when pursued without awareness of what it actually is, one of the most reliable sources of human unhappiness. Because the feeling of being special, like the feeling of satisfaction, is not designed by evolution to be permanent. It is designed to be temporary. It fades. It requires renewal. The recognition that felt sufficient yesterday feels insufficient today. The achievement that felt defining last year feels ordinary this year. The accomplishment that set you apart from your peers 5 years ago is now unremarkable in the context of what you have done since. The sociometer is never fully satisfied. It was never designed to be. It was designed to keep you motivated, to keep you contributing, to keep you earning your place in the group, and it performs this function by ensuring that the sense of being valued is always contingent, always requiring confirmation, always vulnerable to declining. Understanding this does not make the need go away. The sociometer is not something you can simply switch off by understanding it, but understanding it does change your relationship to it. The person who knows why they need to feel special, who understands the evolutionary origins of the discomfort of feeling ordinary, who recognizes the sociometer's signals for what they are, rather than taking them at face value, is in a position to respond to those signals more wisely than the person who experiences them as simply the truth about their situation. The discomfort of feeling ordinary is not evidence that you are in danger. It is evidence that an ancient alarm system is doing what it was built to do. And the first step toward relating to that alarm system more wisely is simply recognizing it for what it is. There is one more dimension of the need to feel special that the research has only recently begun to examine with the seriousness it deserves, and that is the relationship between the need to feel special and the need to feel that one's life has meaning. The psychologist Michael Steger at Colorado State University, who has led one of the most systematic research programs on the psychology of meaning in life, has found that the sense of being special, of having a distinctive contribution to make to the world, is one of the most consistent predictors of the sense that one's life is meaningful. Steger's research distinguishes between the sense that life has meaning, the feeling that one's existence matters and that there is something significant at stake in how one lives, and the search for meaning, the active pursuit of clarity about what that significance consists in and how one's distinctive nature connects to something larger than oneself. What is particularly interesting about Steger's findings is the relationship between specialness and the specifically interpersonal dimensions of meaning. People tend to feel that their lives are most meaningful not when they are achieving things in isolation, but when they are contributing something distinctive to the lives of others, when they are doing something for the people around them that the people around them could not easily get elsewhere, when they are being specifically and irreplaceably valuable to someone. This finding reconnects the need to feel special to the sociometer theory in a way that illuminates both. The sociometer monitors social inclusion and exclusion. But what determines social inclusion in a human group is not simply the quantity of one's presence, but the quality of one's contribution. The individual who is most securely included in the group is the individual who is making a contribution that the group genuinely needs and that it would be difficult to replace. The individual who is most at risk of exclusion is the individual who is interchangeable, who is contributing nothing that another group member could not contribute equally well. The need to feel special is therefore, at its deepest level, the need to be genuinely and irreplaceably valuable to other people. And the most satisfying and most durable resolution to this need is not the performance of specialness for public recognition, but the development of actual capacities and the cultivation of actual relationships in which one's distinctive presence genuinely matters to others. The psychologist Christopher Peterson at the University of Michigan, one of the founders of the positive psychology movement and the lead researcher on the Values in Action inventory of character strengths, made an observation near the end of his life that has become something of a touchstone in the field. Peterson spent years studying what makes human lives go well, cataloging the virtues and strengths that contribute to flourishing, and his conclusion was expressed in a phrase that has been quoted widely since his death in 2012: "Other people matter. Not achievements. Not achievements. Not status. Not the feeling of being recognized as exceptional. Other people. The quality and depth of one's relationships with other human beings is, in Peterson's account, the most reliable determinant of whether a human life is experienced as meaningful, satisfying, and good." This conclusion does not contradict the evolutionary account of the need to feel special. It deepens it. The sociometer monitors social inclusion because social inclusion was, in the ancestral environment, the condition of survival. And in that same ancestral environment, the most secure form of social inclusion was not fame or status or the recognition of strangers, but the deep, reciprocal relationships of people who genuinely depended on each other, who knew each other well, who had demonstrated their value to each other through years of cooperation and mutual support. The modern pursuit of the feeling of being special through performance, through the accumulation of public recognition, through social media metrics and professional achievement, and the construction of distinctive identities, may be, at least in part, a misdirection of an ancient need toward targets that cannot fully satisfy it. The sociometer was calibrated for a world in which the relevant audience was a small, stable group of people who knew you well and whose assessment of your value was grounded in direct experience of your actual behavior and contribution. It was not calibrated for a world in which the relevant audience is an enormous, anonymous, rapidly changing social landscape in which most observers have no direct experience of who you actually are. The pursuit of recognition from thousands of strangers may produce intermittent hits of the feeling the sociometer is looking for, but it is unlikely to produce the deep, stable sense of being valued that comes from being genuinely known and genuinely needed by a small number of people who matter to you. The discomfort of feeling ordinary is real. The sociometer is a powerful system, and its signals are experienced as urgent and important. But understanding what the system was actually designed for, and what kinds of responses actually satisfy it in a durable way, is perhaps the most practically important thing that the psychology of the need to feel special has to offer. You need to feel special because your ancestors needed to matter to their group. The most reliable way to matter to your group was to be genuinely, demonstrably, and irreplaceably valuable to the people in it. And that is still true. Even though the group is now the entire world, and the performance of specialness has become its own enormous industry, and the metrics for measuring recognition have become simultaneously more precise and less meaningful. The sociometer is looking for something real, and the most satisfying answer to its signal is still the one it was originally calibrated for: not to be famous, not to be admired by strangers, but to matter, specifically and genuinely, to people who actually know you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.